Good afternoon. I am Dr. Nsenga Burton, founder and editor of the BurtonWire, an award-winning news site that covers news of the African diaspora. I'm here today, along with the NNPA Black Press USA, talking with some phenomenal women during Women's History Month about a fantastic documentary. If you haven't seen, you must see when it comes to a city near you about the incredible Dorothy Foreman Cotton. And we're going to talk a lot about the civil rights lion, legend, incredible person that is chronicled in this film. But right now, we're going to, and the film is called Move When the Spirit Says Move, the legacy of Dorothy Foreman Cotton. But without further ado, I really want to introduce our director and editor, Ferro, and our director and producer, Dorothy Hoard. So we're going to talk to them today. But before we get started, I want to show you a little bit of the movie. So we're going to show the trailer first, and then we're going to jump into a conversation about this incredible legacy.
I remember we were in a meeting with Dr. King once. He said, "Dorothy, would you mind getting me a cup of coffee?" And Dorothy said, "Andy, get your boss a cup of coffee."
I had power, even though some of the men maybe saw me as the woman at the table.
There's a fine balancing line between living and working respectfully with 6 men who all feel that they walk on water.
It's not shocking to me when people know about Martin Luther King and not how he rose to prominence in relationship with the work that Dorothy Cotton was holding and the advice that she was giving.
A lot of us are trained to be invisible. Just do the work. And sometimes when you're doing the work, you don't have time or a desire to be in the dominant mood.
Voting in itself can be very transactional. But when you're talking about doing the work like Dorothy Cotton did, helping people have a sense of their own power, that is what's transformative.
In my generation, when I was a teacher, you always think of a woman.
The 1960s, when it was dangerous to teach a Negro, to be caught teaching black people for a woman, and particularly teaching them what she was teaching, could get you raped and killed.
The program that Dorothy directed was, quote, from Andrew Young, the best kept secret of the civil rights movement.
Powerful. All right, let's get into it. Introducing Ferro and Debra. I realized I said Dorothy before. I'm sorry, Debra. Debra Hoard, who have put together this amazing documentary about this civil rights legend, Dorothy Foreman Cotton. Thank you for coming today and thank you for coming today and talking to us. I'm tripping over my words today. I think I'm too excited. Okay, so you have to calm down because, if you know me, you know I love civil rights. You know I love history. I love Black women. I love Black women's history. All of it. So, I mean, you get all of this in this documentary. Tell me, out of all the stories you can tell, because, people who make documentaries are always thinking about stories to tell. What is it about Dorothy Cotton's story that made you pull the trigger and say, we're going to make this movie? And either one of you.
So many things. But Dorothy lived the last 25 years of her life in our little upstate New York town of Ithaca. Mm-hmm. And so everybody knew her, but not everybody knew who she was. And so it was when you met her, she just sparkled and she was so charismatic that we just knew that her legacy needed to be carried forward. And when she passed away in 2018, it just, because of the times and the threats to our democracy, this was the perfect time to bring her name forward. And I don't know, Rye. Rye? Why don't you say your favorite story? You had to slog through 100 hours of footage.
Yeah, to be honest, I knew who Dorothy Cotton was when I started on this film, but I had no idea the impact that she had and the very privileged role that she played. And as I got deeper into that footage and interviews and text, it came over me like, wow, this is a really important story that we get to tell. And it just grew from there. So I guess my answer would be, how could we not tell this story when we had access to doing it?
Yes.
We had the resources to do it.
I should mention right up front the Dorothy Cotton Institute, which is our collaborators and partners on this project. And it was Dorothy and her colleagues founded it here in Ithaca in 2007. Okay. And to carry on her legacy, and their work continues today very much. And so our colleagues there were, because we were collaborating with them, we had access to Dorothy's hard drives that she'd been collecting stuff in for, it was funny because there were all of these, crummy VHS tapes, which is hurtful to us filmmakers, but it's still good. It's because the content is so strong that we overlook the image quality on a lot of these things. And so that just made this possible to have all that stuff. I just thought of I'll just say one sort of specific thing that Dorothy used to talk about all the time or mention is that when she would be meeting with people who would be complaining about how they were being treated when they went to pay their bills or something in City Hall. And she would say, and the person would say this, the city clerk is so rude to me. And she said, well, why aren't you the city clerk? And that was supposed, oh, wait a minute, maybe I do have the power as a citizen to have more control over my community and my life. And so that was a good line that she used a lot for people to go, oh,
Yeah, absolutely. So for people who may or may not know too much about Dorothy Cotton, she was the only woman on Dr. King's executive staff, right? Mm-hmm. So, but can you talk a little bit about her as a person? And who she was, kind of how she came to be that person in the life, like the only woman in this group of men.
Well, I wish you could all see the movie right now, and you could see, she was born in Goldsboro, North Carolina, on a dirt road, shotgun house, and she, even as a very young person, knew she was destined for something else. And her whole life, she knew she wasn't going to pick cotton and live on that dusty road. And so because of her, she was, incredibly smart, and she was a beautiful woman and lovely voice. Singing was very important in her world and made the film fun to work on. So she was determined her whole life and carried it along. And she was also, we heard, because she lived in Ithaca, we interviewed a lot of people who knew her just as neighbors, and they would talk about her pineapple upside down cake or things like that without really, and then they'd go into her house and they'd see pictures of her with Dr. King at her getting his Nobel Prize. So I've missed how she actually connected with Dr. King. Rye, maybe you can tell that.
Yeah, I don't think that Dorothy was surprised at how far she was able to go. I think that she even says in the film at one point that she didn't think about the gender issues. I mean, they were there, but she just she showed up in Atlanta with the pastor at her church, Wyatt T. Walker, who she was his assistant, and he was friends with he was friendly and working with Dr. King, who invited him to come and be the executive director of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. And Reverend Walker said, yeah, I'll come, but only if I can bring my chosen assistant, which is Dorothy Cotton. And so she went there, and she was married at the time. She told her husband that she would help them out for about 6 months, and she stayed for 23 years. And she became the director of education for the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. And that just elevated her into this position of having the opportunity to educate thousands of people, maybe hundreds of thousands of people, when you think about those people going back into their communities and starting their own classes. So I don't know that she really thought like, oh, wow, for a woman to be in this position, I know she knew she was fortunate, but she didn't that's just who she was. And I think she kind of always expected that she would do something like that. And she didn't really ask for recognition because it was about the cause rather than the credit for her.
And
so, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Deborah.
Well, and as Reverend Barber says in the trailer, it was what she was doing was dangerous. You know, riding on a bus was dangerous back in the day. And here she was teaching thousands of people to exercise the power of their citizenship. Having been born in the United States, they were U.S. citizens, and they needed to be able to vote, and not just vote, but participate. So that's another reason it was sort of a secret. And so that doesn't help in her getting recognition now, but we can recognize it now.
Right. I mean, you're literally bringing her from the margins for some people, many people, into the center of the discussion around civil rights, which is important. And you're talking about her work as the education director for the SCLC Citizen Education Program, which taught thousands of marginalized African Americans critical skills. And it traveled the Southeast, recruiting adults to participate in literacy, voter registration, and basically the fundamentals of citizenship training. So you are, absolutely correct when you say that was dangerous work then. You could argue it's dangerous work now, but depending on where you are in the world. But the fact that she was willing to do that and the sacrifice that it required for her to do that, I think is really, really important. When we think of Dorothy Cotton, I think about other folks who've been, and these are queer Black folks like Polly Murray and Bayard Rustin, who've been made invisible by the civil rights movement because of the times that they were in, but then also, it's discrimination, right? And what people were willing to accept and do. And so we have these documentaries that are out that are fantastic. Constance Baker Motley also just kind of unearthed for a lot of people. What role do you think this documentary plays in terms of the legacy of Dorothy Cotton, and where does it fit in with these other documentaries that we're seeing about these folks who have been central to the civil rights movement, but were left out or marginalized in some way, shape, or form, literally, typically due to something that is identity related, whether it's gender or sexual identity or what have you.
I can say one thing, or let Raya go ahead.
I'm just thinking of how it fits. I feel like in terms of the way that it's going to serve to teach folks about her legacy is that her legacy is really, and I think she would agree, I hope, is that what she always wanted to do was make people realize that they had the power themselves, that they were, the power was within them. They didn't have to go out and get empowered. It was already there. And she just kind of tapped into that power with everyone that she encountered, even people who she wasn't necessarily trying, in a classroom setting with, but just even in conversation. That's where she went, just encouraging people to be the one to make the change that that they wanted to see. And I know that's like kind of that's a phrase now that is that people overuse, but she really meant it. And so I think what I'm getting from people that watch the movie is that they feel like welcomed into something that they didn't know about before, because that's what she held. She held these spaces for people to realize something. Like Lucas Johnson is in the film, and he says, "You don't know what you don't know until somebody invites you in and teaches you." And that's what Dorothy did for everyone that she encountered. And so I think that is ultimately her legacy, is to just make people aware that you can be a leader in your own community. Like Deb said earlier, you can be the county clerk, or you can gather your community members and survey them and find out what's important to them, and then bring that to the city director. And that's the kind of thing, those kind of localized, what feels like maybe a small action is so important when everybody feels that they can do something.
I remembering when we premiered this film a few weeks ago in Los Angeles at the Pan-African Film Festival. We had a surprise guest in the audience that we had not known was coming. And that was James Lawson, who was, is a legend also. And he loved the film, which was a wonderful thing to hear. But he also called it, I think he said, this is the missing piece. And that it fills in a piece of the story that he was excited to be able to use. He's still teaching at 95, I think. So I liked that phrase for the film.
Yeah, so this movie is bringing out, all kinds of people, and James Lawson is central to the really the civil rights movement, the teaching of nonviolence, which is something that Dorothy Cotton is also really credited with, right? So and when I was, when I think about the documentary, I think about all of the kind of civil rights museums that we visit. And then, like if you go to the National Civil Rights Museum here in Atlanta, they actually have an exhibit where you can see people, you can experience it. It's like an audio visual exhibit, and you can experience people trying to sit at a counter and being admonished, or having to turn the other cheek. And so when you say Dr. Lawson says that it's the missing piece, I thought about that immediately. Like that missing piece is who's really doing that type of training, so that people knew what they were up against, and could withstand that type of pressure and humiliation and degradation and what have you, in order to move society forward. So yeah. And speaking of Dr. Lawson, what about some of the people who are in this documentary? You have Ambassador Young, obviously. You have LaTosha Brown, who is, Black Voters Matter. She's the head of that. She's been, fighting the good fight for a very long time. One of our contemporary civil rights legends, right? So you have all these, interesting and dedicated and people in the movie, in the documentary. How did you make that happen? Like, how did you convince people to come and talk about Dorothy Cotton?
Well, if they knew Dorothy, it was no problem. And we had a long list of people to speak with, and we got through, like John Lewis was on our list, and unfortunately he passed away before we could get to him. But we feel good about the people we did talk to, and like Ambassador Young. And so we had no trouble getting people to talk to us. Well, the problem we had was the pandemic.
Okay.
Right in the middle of production. We had to sort of, everything came to a screeching halt. But we did, we have everybody in our team really has sort of internalized Dorothy to the extent that we say to ourselves, well, what would Dorothy do right now? And we decided she would move. She wouldn't sit around and wait for the pandemic to be over, and Rye was able to put together a fabulous 11-minute short called There's Your Ready Girl. which promoted the film, was about Dorothy and about the film, and release it during, right before the presidential election in 2020. And, I like to think maybe it had an impact, because a lot of people saw it. So that was, that worked out really well. And then as the pandemic eased, we were able to travel again and fill in the gaps. So.
So when you talk about, you have Reverend Barber and the other folks in there. When you talk about the pandemic, how long were you actually working on this documentary? Like how long did it take for you to do it once you thought about doing it, and then from conception to completion? How long was it? And I do want you to talk more about filming during the pandemic or not. But how long did it actually take you to make this film?
5 years. I interviewed Dorothy in 2018. 2012.
Okay.
Was the first time I interviewed her, and then she passed away in 2018, and that's the moment at which I think we really started. We said, okay, we got to do this now. So, and documentaries take a long time.
Absolutely.
It's not a get rich quick thing. That's for sure.
So you interviewed her in 2012. She passed away in 2018. What happened between 2012 and 2018?
Well,
for her, or like for us making the film?
For you making the film. I want to hear about the filmmaking process. I want to hear more about that.
Well, in 2018, there was a celebration of her life here at Cornell where Reverend Barber spoke, and watching that footage really got me interested in making the film, because at the time Photosynthesis and Deb knew that they wanted to make the film, but I wasn't necessarily signed on as the director or editor. I was like, interested. And then I watched the celebration and was like, whoa, this is important. This is powerful. Just the things that he was saying about her. And then we started, there was a process of just kind of figuring out, okay, well, how are we going to do this? And Deb was meeting with people at the Dorothy Cotton Institute and kind of talking about the whole overall vision of it. And we really just kind of started to get going. And then COVID happened. And so we all kind of had to stop in our tracks. And also one of the founders at the Dorothy Cotton Institute passed away too. And so that was a big blow it was unexpected. And so like Deb said, we didn't just want to sit around. So we couldn't get our funding. We had all these sort of things in place, but it all got just screeched to a halt when the pandemic happened. So with what we had already gotten in terms of some footage and interviews with local people mostly, and Latasha, we put together this 10-minute film. And so that took probably most of 2020, because we ended up releasing it in late October of 2020, and it got a ton of really good response. And so that really lifted us up to think, oh, wow, people really care about this story and care about this person. And so then we were able to start to get the funding that we were hoping for the year before, to then really dig in and start making the feature, which for me took hundreds of hours, like Deb said, just going through all of the interviews and speeches and everything that she had collected in her own house, and then things that I could find from other resources too. So, and then just kind of figuring out, okay, how are we going to tell this story? Are we going to tell it linearly? Are we going to start here? What's going to be the focus? And so I think the first thing that I worked on was making the part of the movie that really talks about the citizenship education program, because that was her work. And so that was a good way for me to just really get started. And so that's probably about 20 minutes of the film explaining that, and got that really solid and shared it with some people, and then just kept going and built the story around that mostly.
And Deborah, as a producer, I know that you work with the Cotton Institute on the documentary, but how were you able to where were you able to find additional funds to get the film made?
Well, the little promotional film, the film we made, There's Your Ready Girl, that Rye was just talking about, made a huge difference, I think, in getting completion funds. Significant completion funds. So we weren't cutting corners on things, and so that's huge, and that's something that a lot of people, when making a movie that way, possible funders could say, "Oh, wow, this is important. This is good. This is worthy." And so we were able to raise the money. I'm proud to say, actually, almost all of it from local foundations in Tompkins County, the Park Foundation, the Tompkins Gift Fund, the Legacy Fund of Tompkins County, various things like that. So that was very, very rewarding, and it doesn't always happen on every documentary film that you actually get the money you need. So that was another bit of Dorothy's power, I think, helping us out, because it's not easy making. Documentary film can be kind of risky for funders. Not every film gets finished.
Yeah.
Not every film is worthy of all that. So it's the Ready Girl really helped us a lot in fundraising. I wanted to say one thing that I think is kind of interesting is how in 2012, why I was talking to Dorothy in the first place, because she was leading a group of 20 people from the Dorothy Cotton Institute and colleagues who were civil rights elders and others to the West Bank in Palestine on what she called a listening tour of trying. She was fascinated by how enemies could live so close together, or how could this be resolved without violence. And so she and her colleagues were going over there, and there was some thought that I could go with a film crew to document that, which would have been fabulous. So I interviewed her. I called her up and I said, would you come and I could talk to you? Maybe somebody would give us money to go with you if they could hear why you're going. And so she said she'd call me back to think about it. And she called me back and she said, well, I just talked to some of my friends and advisors and they all said not to do this, but I think I will. I think it's a good idea. So come pick me up. So I went, picked her up, and we ended up talking for an hour, and that formed the sort of the heart and the basis and the central kernel of the film. And in fact, her comments from that are what we used at the very end of the film to bring home her concept of having, think of yourself as somebody who can do something. It's funny how we never got to go to the West Bank, but it was the beginning of this whole project.
Wow. So when you let's talk a little bit about how you decide, when you make a documentary, how you decide on the topic. Do you think the topic, because people think differently about this, but do you all think the topic chooses you, or do you choose the topic? And if so, why? Like, does this documentary choose you, or did you choose?
Oh, we choose.
Oh, I thought it.
Okay.
Yeah,
right.
I think it's. It would be nice if. Anything I've ever worked on, I feel like it chose me, because things just sort of start to happen, and you start to. The way that I work is like I just get in there and then I find myself making something, like it's not like a seeking out, like, oh, I'd like to make a movie about this topic. I'm going to go and talk to these people who are involved in this thing. It doesn't, for me personally, it hasn't really happened that way. It's just kind of like people know that what I do, and then an interesting topic comes up, and if somebody has the resources to make it happen and I'm interested, then I'm all for it.
For me, I own this company, Photosynthesis Productions, and I can do whatever I want with it. I mean, I need to make a living, or my people need to make a living, and so I feel very much that choose the work I want to spend 5 years of my life on. And and so that's interesting to me. And we have another project. This project has already begun to lead to our next one. Because of the network and the people and the inspiration that's come from this project, we have immediate follow-up in the works. So we did our first shoot for it last night. So that's exciting. Maybe Ra, you can talk about how the next project.
Last night we went to the county legislature building and filmed a meeting where there were people there speaking for or against raising the minimum wage, and then also what is it, like initiating or making official the Democracy Day here in Tompkins County on August 6th, which is when the Civil Rights Act was signed in 1964. And so with doing this movie about Dorothy Cotton and all of the people in town who know who she was and are involved in democracy and civic engagement, it just felt natural to start working with people locally who, particularly young people, who are doing really important work around democracy and voting rights and civic engagement, and having it be like, yes, our democracy is under attack, but we can still be joyous in the fact that like we still have a democracy, and we have these communities, and we can get involved and engaged with each other. And hopefully this new project that we're just starting ends up focusing on people doing this kind of work all over the country, particularly young people, because the youth vote made a huge impact in the last election. And the things that generation cares about are the things that are going to keep democracy hopefully happening going forward.
Okay. Well, I'm sure that we'll be looking forward to that. I want to see that film for sure. I thought about Madeline Anderson immediately when you talked about, the pay and the gap, which is in terms of a documentarian who is foundational to that type of documentary work. But I have a question for you too. Did you all have any hesitation about covering Dorothy Cotton as a Black woman, because she's African American, obviously, and you are Debra, I don't know everything. You appear to not be, because you never know with Black folks.
Yes.
You appear not to be Black. I don't know, but did you get any pushback from that, or how did you handle some of the delicate things that may have come up around that issue, if it was an issue?
It certainly has come up, and but what it's not apparent right here in front of you all is the Dorothy Cotton Institute. Our colleagues were Black, many of them, and they were directly involved in great detail in every aspect of making the movie. And so I felt comfortable working with it, but it's a very legitimate question about representation. But I've done a lot of work about African Americans, and I feel that since I have this film company, and I need to do something with it, so we plowed ahead.
Right.
Yeah, I definitely felt I was conscious of that going into the project to begin with. And what I kind of said to myself is that if I can't tell this story in Dorothy's voice, if we don't have enough footage of Dorothy speaking to tell the story, I'm not sure that I can do it, because I'm not Black and because I don't have that history. But we had so much content from her, and as I got going, Dorothy could have probably been a singular voice. Maybe it would have been a slightly shorter movie, but I could have done it, because that's just how much I had to work with. And I felt that it was really important to center the voices, not only of Dorothy Cotton, but of marginalized people in general. And so that's kind of how I operated on, like, if I'm not centering the voices of Black women, particularly, or Black people who were involved in the civil rights movement or involved now, then I don't really have I'm not prepared to tell this story, but I ended up being able to do it. And hopefully, watching the movie, that comes through.
It's, the film is really, so much of it is Dorothy's voice. And so we're very proud of that. And that's the way it should be.
Yeah, absolutely. So when you are thinking about, I know you interview, like, because that's what documentaries do, you interview a whole bunch of people. Talk about how you decided who would make it in, because I know that had to be hard, trying to figure out whose voice was going to make it in and who's going to be left on the sidelines, or the extent to which somebody's voice is included, because those are always very difficult decisions to make. And I can't even imagine, when I saw, like, Reverend Barber, I was like, I can't even imagine how you edited around anything that because he's just so prolific, and every word he uses is thoughtful and intentional. The same thing with Latasha Brown, the same thing with Ambassador Young, right? And all the other folks that are in this documentary. They don't mince words, they don't waste words, anything like that. So how did you make those decisions? I know that's a creative process, but it's sometimes technical, but it's definitely a creative process. Like, how did you make those decisions?
Well, initially, a lot of our advice came from the Dorothy Cotton Institute and their national advisors. And they have a fabulously connected and important group connected with the Institute. And so they were able to give us, we got a list of 50 names. And then, it was a winnowing, and some of it was many of them were elderly and were not able. And so that was always a shame, but that probably cut at least a third of the people out of our list to begin with. And the rest of it is the grit of digging, is pursuing the people and arranging it and getting there and all that stuff. And somehow, I guess, I'm not sure. Some of it was by chance. Latasha Brown was in Ithaca. So we got her in front of the camera. There are things like that helped us out. But also, and not everybody we interviewed is in the movie. Okay. And that's a hard one.
Ended up on that cutting room floor.
But and everybody always said, we never promised them, we never say you're definitely, but they understand, and everybody we talked to about Dorothy loved her so much that they said, I don't care. I will, I'll do it. And I don't care if I'm in the movie, but I loved Dorothy. Did I answer? Rye, I probably didn't even answer.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of people that we interviewed who didn't end up in the movie, or like with the example of Reverend Barber, like, he could have, I mean, almost everything he says is usable, right? I mean, he's so engaging, so powerful. And one of the thing I think I had him in the movie quite a bit more in previous versions. And I decided that, what are the biggest messages that the film, I think, has, that Dorothy specifically gives, is that we need to stop, like, we do bad things to our leaders sometimes. We put them on these pedestals and we think that we can't do anything. And not that I think that we do that with Reverend Barber, but with, like, someone who gets to stand at a pulpit and preach and has that much power in their voice, it's wonderful. I was so grateful to have him in the movie. I also just didn't want it to overpower, like, what she was saying, which is that we need to really look more inside of ourselves to find that inspiration. I mean, Reverend Barber is so inspiring, and also I wanted it to come through, like, to really be able to hear many voices, many people who are doing just incredible work, but maybe aren't as well known or charismatic or inspiring with their voice as Reverend Barbara. So and I thought also like it was important to center women specifically. So we did have quite a bit of interview from Dr. Ambassador Young and Bernard Lafayette and Reverend Barber and other men, and their voices are in there, but not nearly as much as Dorothy's voice and the voices of other women who are continuing to do the work now.
And can you talk more about centering the voices of women? Because I don't think that, I mean, that's an academic, that's the way we talk about it as academics.
Yeah.
What does that mean, like in layman's term, for folks who may not necessarily be kind of engaged in that work on an ongoing and daily basis?
Well, I see a lot like on social media and other places where people say like Black women are going to save us.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like that's a lot to put on one population, right?
Yes.
And I think that I want to hear from Black women. I don't want to hear from other people about what Black women are going to do for us. You know what I mean? Like, so that's just my own personal take on that. Like, how do we center the voices of that? Well, we just let them speak and we hear from them. We don't, use them and quote them and things like, I want to hear directly from these people who are going to save us, because I think, like I said, I think Black women have been doing this work, and I've, learned more and more about the extent of that from talking to people like Latasha Brown and just from learning more about Dorothy and the women like her. Black women have been doing this kind of work forever. And the system still doesn't serve them because their voices are not centered in our mainstream culture and media. So that's what it is to me.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So when we think about what do you want people to get out of watching this documentary? Like when you get them in the auditorium or theater or where you have your screenings, what do you want people to get from this documentary, audiences?
We want them to, yeah, I mean, it's funny when even just a few months ago, I might have said we want them to feel empowered, but I have come to believe I don't use the word empowered anymore because, as Dorothy says in the film, if empowered means that power is being given to you. And if somebody can give you your freedom or your power, they can also take it away. And so we are trying to, so I have come to not say feel empowered, but to recognize their own power and to transform the way they think about their power and their civic engagement and to do something. Move.
How about you, Ra?
I always say, like, I want the movie to do what Dorothy did, even just maybe not at I would hope at the level that she did. Like, I want it to inspire people to go out and do something right away, like something in their local community, something that that's just taking one step. I feel like the way that we're trying to promote this movie is really in a grassroots kind of way, just like the way that the education program was promoted in the 60s. And so if we can let as many people know, people who are already kind of engaged in doing this kind of work, know about the film, and then they can share it with their networks. I really feel like I want a good percentage of the audience to be young people who are doing advocacy and civil rights work now, but don't really know who Dorothy was or don't have an extensive knowledge of the history of the movement, because I think that's really important for people to know where their work is coming from, where it started, and the people who did it in the beginning, who didn't have a plan, who just kind of made the road by walking it there wasn't a blueprint, but now there is. Like, now there is a blueprint. Like, Dorothy Cotton left us that blueprint, which is act locally, get involved with your community, figure out what's wrong, come together and change it. She really believed that, and that's what she did. And I don't think a lot of people necessarily believe that that's possible because it sounds so simple. So yeah, it's something that I hope people can realize, that it actually is that simple, and that it is something that we can all do.
Okay.
One thing
I'm sorry, go ahead, Debra.
I wanted to add about that the Dorothy Cotton Institute is in the process of finishing a citizenship education program for the 21st century. So that it's something that will be available for people to, whether they see the movie or not, but that it's a roadmap for citizenship education, which is always going to be good. So that's an important piece that I think we hope will be part of the legacy here.
Yeah, and it's so important. That's an important work to be doing because, we're having so much trouble now with what is being taught or is not being taught or outlawed or what have you, in our school systems, especially our public school systems. And so, the fact that they're doing that work, you would think that how to be a citizen, right? How to use your citizenship in order to create the change you want to see would be something that would be taught in a school, right? But it's very, in much the way that Dorothy and her colleagues were working on that then, people are working on it now. Debra, when you interviewed her in 2012, did Dorothy share her thoughts or opinion about the current state of the civil rights movement at all? And if so, what were they?
She was still optimistic and believed that we possess the power to change our lives, and spoke very much about that. Oh, I'm not sure what just happened with our picture, but at any rate, it was that's why she was going to the West Bank. She believed that change was possible in a nonviolent way, and she still believed in it, and she believed in it so strongly that we do too. I don't know if we have a moderator anymore.
I think she may
we
be gone,
lost her,
but I
she'll
think
be right back.
others are still listening.
Yes.
I think that nonviolence was something that became more. I mean, it was part of her. She wasn't. She didn't use it as a tactic. It was just the way that she lived, and I think that as she got older, that philosophy as well as just way of being became more and more important for her to share with other people. And so, like, kind of confronting that we have a culture of violence, and that people don't really understand, or people don't wake up to that and try to make it different. Like, I remember when we were in the theater when Reverend Lawson spoke, or Dr. Lawson spoke, he said, a long time ago, humans made this decision that we were going to solve problems with violence. And that the goal of him and others like him and Dorothy and Dr. King was to reimagine that, could we survive being with mutuality rather than this sort of kill or be killed mentality. So that's really what I think. She wasn't thinking about it like in terms of our civil rights movement in the US anymore. She was thinking about it on a global scale, and about how people can be together and work out their problems in nonviolent ways.
So yeah, as we celebrate Women's History Month, and we elevate the voices of women in general and Black women specifically, who do you think Dorothy Cotton's contemporaries are now, and why?
I think LaTosha Brown.
LaTosha Brown.
Yes, definitely. Yes, definitely LaTosha.
And there's a Nia Nunn in our own town who is also in the film. Is another powerful woman who is getting the work done in lots of different ways.
And yeah,
and they're
particularly with young people, like little kids, that she works with every day, and has this amazing program where, just it's Black joy and being just seeing yourself as someone who is powerful and important, and not other. So like she really centers like being specific with young people of color, and to really just own that and celebrate it.
There probably are thousands of women in the country right now who are her heirs, her colleagues, but maybe they don't know it yet. Or maybe they do, but we're hoping that this film will, maybe they'll see in themselves, oh, that's what I'm doing, and I can do that, and it's worth doing. So that's our hope. Inspiration of all kinds.
Yeah, well, we'd love to end on an inspirational note. If anyone has comments out there watching us out in the world, you need to send them, or questions, because we're going to wrap up in about 9 minutes. But in terms of inspiration, what would you say, or what do you say to women of any age, girls or women who want to make documentaries, right? How should they start? Where should they start? What should they be thinking of? What, best practices? I know this is like 12 questions, but you know where I'm going. Best practices do you offer, or would you offer them, or advice for people who are interested in really pursuing careers in documentary?
Well, it's you have to really believe in what you're doing, because it's hard, and it's important to really strongly believe in what you're doing. And I also say, once again, like Dorothy, I say, just get started. Get yourself a little. You can get a handy cam for $1,000 and document your grandparents or your community garden or anything. And then by that process, you find out a lot of the tricky parts of, rolling a camera. You're looking at this much of the world. And so how do you figure out where to point the camera to see just that much? And then how hard it is to make it look good and put it together. So I say get started. And be resilient.
And be resilient. Resilient against what?
Well, things happen. The camera breaks, it rains, the interviewee just has some wears a hat they refuse to take off. I don't know. There are millions of things that can happen in shooting and editing a documentary, and it takes money and time.
Yeah.
Right.
I would say, it is possible to make a movie all by yourself, but I wouldn't recommend it. Yes. And so I would say definitely find people who are interested in the same things that you are, and bounce ideas off of them. And, like when I was newly getting into this work, like 20 years ago, I was really protective. I didn't want to show people like rough cuts of things. And I was always like giving a million disclaimers before showing something. And it was all so much stress for like sharing what you have and sharing your ideas, even if it's not done like with people who you trust, is so powerful and important. You can learn so much from just like, putting down your pride or your self-consciousness to just like say, hey, like I'm doing this thing. Can you look at it and tell me how it hits you? Because you can get really focused all by yourself in the editing room and lose perspective. And then and then you have this thing that you think is brilliant, but actually maybe it could have used a lot of more eyes on it and a lot of more feedback to get to the place that it would be relevant to most people.
Yeah. Filmmaking is extremely collaborative, or good filmmaking, I should say, is for us at least. So that's a key.
Okay. And you talked about your distribution. Were you doing it more like, in the spirit of Dorothy Cotton, more kind of localized distribution? Where can people watch your film? Is it going to be in other festivals? And actually, this is a really good question. Can you talk about the importance of film festivals in getting movies like this out to the public?
Right. Well, we're on our sort of festival run right now, and we're actually seeking distribution. And that's one of the purposes of festivals, really, is they not only bring filmmakers together to enjoy each other and each other's work and collaborate that way, but also to get the film to get noticed, to get reviews, and to attract a distributor. We, at the showing I was just doing in California, the first comment was, I think every high school should show this film. And then, so at the end, that is actually our ultimate goal, is that we will be able to get it. We'll do some more festivals. I should mention Annapolis Film Festival is coming up this weekend, Annapolis, Maryland.
Okay.
And the Finger Lakes Environmental Film Festival is also this weekend here in Ithaca. Okay. Where we're it's our Ithaca premiere, which sold out in 30 hours.
Oh wow, that's fantastic.
Once the tickets went online, so that's pretty exciting. We're looking forward to that. And then we don't have definite dates for the festivals coming up after that, but then in the fall we plan more of a college, university tour of panel discussions and screenings in educational institutions, community organizations, religious groups. So I don't know if I captured all of that. Museums, like all of the, we could do a museum run through the South very easily with showing things and trying to have talkbacks and panel discussions always connected. So people feel like they can talk about it, they can learn more, they can figure out what to do. And I should say we have website movewhenthespiritssaysmove.com, and we have all of the various social media, Twitter.
We post screenings up there anytime we find out when there's going to be a festival screening.
Has our screening list. So I hope people keep in touch that way and let us know. And we want to hear. We're getting emails all the time from people who want to use their film in their coursework, in their other work, and we're hoping for all of that in the fall.
Okay, fantastic. All right, and I know you talked about this a little bit in the beginning, but as we end, can you remind us, let us know what you're working on next, what your next film is going to be, also how we can follow you to learn more about the work that you're working on, and are you all a team now that you've done this film, or are you working on projects separately?
We're a team.
Yeah. The next project will be collaborative as well. And we don't really have a working title. We're throwing around a few different ideas, but the real what we want to do is to focus on youth movement, why this generation could be just as effective as the generation that was active in the 60s, the reasons why young people are affected by the injustices here in our country, and but what we do also understand is that we need to be focused also on particular people who are doing this work, and we haven't found that character yet, or that person that we're going to sort of follow around, or maybe 2 or 3 people. We're really just in the beginning stages of kind of trying to figure out what the story is and who the people are. But we're connected to somebody who's very well connected in that world. And so we'll be hopefully posting news about interviews that we're doing soon, and just getting a better sense of what the movie is.
And maybe there's somebody listening or watching right now who's doing the work, and they should get in touch with us, and they can do that at whenthespiritssaysmove.com. There's a contact form. My company Photosynthesis Productions also has a website with information about a lot of our other work. So with the internet, we're certainly, you can get a hold of us one way or another. But we'd love to hear from people right now if they have ideas about who we should be talking to about youth voting.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much. Again, Move When the Spirit Says Move, the legacy of Dorothy Foreman Cotton should be playing in a film festival near you. Definitely check it out. I want to say thank you so much to Deborah Hoard and Ferro, who have put so much of their heart and soul into this outstanding film. I encourage people to watch it and to definitely support this film and to support other documentaries centering dynamic Black women and legends like Dorothy Foreman Cotton. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much for inviting us.
All right.
Thank you.
Take care.
Okay, you too.